resumes in public session. Just waiting for the contact up there. Before we begin, can I remind everybody to turn off their mobile phones completely as they interfere with the recording business. Before we commence today's business, as Chair of this committee, I just want to express my condolences, and indeed I'm sure the condolences of the committee to the families of those who have been bereaved as a result of road traffic accidents recently, and the trauma and their loss is greatly felt, not just locally but around the country. We now turn to our engagement with the chairperson designated of the Marine Casualty Investigation Board, Ms Claire Callanan. You're very welcome indeed. The purpose of our meeting today is to hear from the chairperson designate your approach to undertaking the role of chairperson and your vision for the Marine Casualty Investigation Board. And I know you'll understand what I've got to read this privileged statement here. Before we commence, for the purposes of witnesses attending in accordance with procedures, I have to read the following. By virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charge against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charge against either person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I now invite Ms Claire Callanan, Chairperson Designate, Marine Casualty Investigation Board, to make her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to present my credentials here. My name is Claire Callanan. I'm a solicitor and have been in practice for almost 40 years. I'm a partner in the firm of Beecham's Solicitors and have been a partner there and in a previous firm for over 30 years. I have a Bachelor of Civil Law from UCD from 1978. I did a stage with the Legal Service of the European Commission in 1980. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators since 1999. I'm a founder mentor of the Joint Law Society and Bar Council Law and Women Mentoring Programme, which is in its third year. Last year I obtained a certificate in Charity Law, Governance and Trusteeship from the Law Society, which course was run by the Law Society and the Wheel. I've just been appointed to the Board of Action Aid Ireland. I'm a partner in the Litigation and Dispute Resolution Department in Beecham's. I work with state and semi-state bodies, major financial institutions, owner-managed businesses and multinational companies, and have extensive experience in the public administration, financial services and healthcare sectors. I specialise in contentious matters and have a lot of expertise across a range of areas, including in particular administrative and constitutional law, contractual disputes, company law, insurance law, construction, employment equality law, defamation law. To frame my experience, I've just set out some details in relation to the functions of the Marine Casualty Investigation Board. It was established in 2002 under the Merchant Shipping Investigation of Marine Casualties Act 2000. The legislative framework for the operation of the MCIB, which is the reporting and investigation of marine casualties, and the powers of the MCIB investigators are set out in the Act and in the related European Communities Merchant Shipping Investigation of Accident Regulations and Directive. In carrying out its functions, the MCIB also complies with the provisions of the International Maritime Organisation's Casualty Investigation Code. To summarise the role of the MCIB, it arranges for investigations and reports into serious marine incidences where there's a fatality or a serious personal injury, the loss of a person overboard, significant injury to property from a collision, or significant environmental damage. And that relates jurisdictionally to any vessel that's in Irish waters, any Irish vessel, wherever that may be, or if the vessel is normally located or moored in Irish waters and under the control of a resident of the state, where the incident occurred in waters contiguous to Irish waters. The investigations are conducted by professional investigators appointed by the MCIB to determine the cause of the accident, but not to determine who is at fault, and with a view to making recommendations for the avoidance of similar marine casualties. By the end of 2017, the MCIB had published 216 reports into incidences under its statutory remit. The board published 8 final reports in 2017, and it has published 7 reports in 2018. I can add also the board's 2017 report was published on its website this morning, I believe. My legal experience is, I believe, relevant in guiding the MCIB in respect of the natural justice aspects of the investigation reports. In particular, under Section 36 of the 2000 Act, interested parties, being anyone who is likely to be adversely affected by the report, has an opportunity to comment to the board on reports before they finalised. I've worked on a wide variety of investigations that involve issues of statutory interpretation, natural and constitutional justice, and the assessment of evidence, including its weight, relevance and credibility. Also, because of the sort of regulatory and administrative law work I advise on, I've worked with a number of state and semi-state entities, so I'm familiar with the practical operations of public entities and the various applicable legal regimes and codes that establish their jurisdiction and functions. By way of example of the sort of work that I've done in the area of constitutional and administrative law, I acted for the Law Society in the proceedings involving the Motor Insurance Bureau of Ireland that sought to ensure that persons injured in road traffic accidents where the drivers were no longer insured due to the collapse of Setanta Insurance received proper compensation and not the capped amounts that were then applicable from the Insurance Compensation Fund. This involved complex interpretation issues between the obligations to the Motor Insurers Bureau as against those of the Compensation Fund. And that case led ultimately last year to the 2018 Insurance Act that gave these road traffic accidents the same level of damages as other injured parties. I've also acted for the Charities Regulator in the first prosecution and also in the first judicial review under the Charities Act. The particular prosecution was directed towards ensuring that charity shops are conducted by legitimate registered charities so that the public interest is protected by properly regulated charities. I've also acted for the European Commission and the European Council in proceedings challenging the EU-Turkey Statement on Asylum, which was brought somewhat oddly by Syrian asylum seekers in Greece who are trying to get leave to go to Germany. I've also acted for an Irish quadriplegic receiving healthcare in Germany under the EU healthcare regime in proceedings against the HSE where they sought to prevent his continuing care in Germany, and that case went to the European Court of Justice. I'm chairperson of my firm's finance subcommittee. I have good experience in all aspects of our owner-led business, from personnel, business, marketing and finance to insurance and regulation. I believe that experience on the board of a professional business partnership is relevant in providing the necessary experience, engagement and approach required for the chairmanship of the Marine Casualty Board. The board is an independent body with its own funding provided by the Oireachtas under Section 19 of the Act. It's independent of the Minister for Transport, Tourism, Sport in the performance of its functions, and in general must be independent of any other person or bodies whose interests could be conflicted with the functions of the board. I'm not a member of any sailing club or boating club. I've not acted for persons likely to be involved in investigations, and I don't believe that I have any conflicts that would impair my appointment as chairperson of the MCIB or that would affect its independence. On a European front, the MCIB is an active member of the European Maritime Safety Agency, or EMSA. EMSA is responsible for providing technical assistance in the implementation of the particular directive, establishing principles governing the investigations of accidents in the marine transport sector. It's also responsible for maintaining a platform of casualty data and investigation reports in respect of incidents that fall within the directive, and they are provided by member states, and that is a task that MCIB has on behalf of Ireland. The board members of MCIB are Dorothea Dowling, Frank Cronin, Brian Hogan, Nigel Lindsay, and the Secretary of the Board is Denise Hyland. I'd like particularly to take this opportunity to thank the outgoing Chairperson, Cleona Cassidy, for all her work with the MCIB since her initial appointment in 2013. It's a small board and a considerable amount of work is required outside of the regular board meetings. In addition to all of that, Cleona gave freely of her time to brief me on the role to ensure there will be a smooth handover. I hope to be able to contribute to continue the good work carried out by her and the other board members. Thank you for this opportunity.
Ms Callanan, for your very comprehensive and detailed presentation to the committee. Would members like to ask some questions? Senator O'Malley.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And first of all, thank you, Ms Callanan, for your detailed presentation of the work that will be entailed, and obviously you're highly qualified for that in the sense of your legal work. Just a few quick questions. Could you maybe, you've mentioned there of the reports that investigations or incidents that have been investigated. Have you, do you know how many current investigations are on at present? I suppose the other thing, the main topic at the minute is Brexit. Will that have any implications for your work? I know that it's investigations in Irish waters, but I just ask you that as well. And you mentioned the 4 members of the board. Just, are there any vacancies on the board, or is that the full board of the MCIB?
I think that is the full board.
Yes. And finally, you might just let us know what the remuneration will be for your post. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ask questions. Sandra O'Keefe, then. Sorry.
Do you want to go? Okay. No, Ms Callanan, you're welcome, and thank you for your deliberation and sharing with us your experience. You're certainly, in my view, very, very eminently qualified for this particular role, and I wish you every success in it. I just have a couple of observations. There are 3 areas, general areas you covered yourself, your qualifications, which are of the highest standard, in my view. A little bit about the board and the independence of the board, and obviously the importance of that. And I'd like to ask you a question on the board, just a little bit more, if you have it, on each of the members. You have a small board, and I think it would be useful, Chair, if we had just a little bit of an outline of the board, primarily because it's a small board. The other thing is I'm involved in a number of boards in different areas myself, and in something that I think it's really, my perspective is really important from a board, and particularly for a chair to consider, would be to consider inviting an organisation like the Institute of Directors to carry out a little bit of a due diligence on the board, maybe sometimes like once every 3 years, and saying, okay, how are we here? Are we fit for purpose? What's our weakness and strengths from a corporate governance point of view from a board? And to me, I think that supports the integrity of the board, and in particular the chairperson. I'm just offering that as a thought, because I found it very, very useful in other areas, in private companies, but also in some public organisations. Another thing in relation to the board, you mentioned the EU EMSA organisation. My experience in this overall area is in aviation and the Air Accident Investigation Bureau, AAIU, unit. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that, or if you do have any interaction or engagement with them. They're extremely professional, and because we're all on the same island, we're dealing with accidents. They have processes and systems, and I think both of you might learn from each other, and it might be of benefit in sharing methodology with regards to investigating accidents. The work of the board, that's professional investigators, are they employees or are they contractors, or is it a mixture of both? And then in relation to reports, you've published 7 reports, you say, in 2018. What happened to those reports and the follow-up action on those. That's the chair.
Just a couple more questions. Senator Feehan.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Callanan, and you're very, very welcome. And I suppose this was a board that I suppose I wasn't aware of, and I'd say most of the people in Leinster House wouldn't be aware of it. So, and obviously it was set up in 2002, and I suppose in the early 2010s, people were talking about getting rid of quangos, and obviously there was due diligence done on your board, so it survived. So it obviously is has an important role. Just for myself to understand, if a fatality or a serious personal injury or loss of person overboard, how do you go about that investigation? Are the Gardaí involved or various agencies involved? Just let's say if somebody fell overboard, what happens, or just to inform us how the investigation is carried out, or what various aspects of the state agencies are involved, and it just might inform us more. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. O'Keefe, you okay?
Just a simple question, and I will come. Just ask, in your period as being a member of the, you have been a member of the board, haven't you? Oh no, I thought you were on the board as well. No, I can just wish Claire the best luck, so Chair. I thought you were on the board.
Okay, Ms. Conlon, if you wish to reply there, yeah.
Why don't I just go in reverse order? How is an investigation carried out? I'm new. However, just to give you an illustration, yesterday we got an incident report. So the way it operates is the emergency services filter potential marine incidents, and they report into the board. The board has 3 staff. They circulate that immediately to the members of the board. So this was my first experience of it. So there was a flurry of emails yesterday afternoon over a very short period of time in relation to very brief technical outline of the incident, whether there was any information that was essential missing to determine whether you would have a preliminary investigation or immediately appoint an investigator for a full investigation, the identification of an investigator who was available, and I mean within an hour of the first communication there was an investigator available, identified and tasked with carrying out a preliminary investigation. Yes, and that did involve checking with the guards in the first instance. Other state agencies that will be involved obviously will be any of the emergency services, Coast Guard, local fishing information, the weather service, because that's on the reports I've read seems to be an essential piece of information. They have all the technical information as to what is available at the time, and the investigators are independently. They are independent persons. They are retained as consultants by the board. They are appointed from time to time following the usual sort of process. They are experts in that they have expertise in marine engineering or naval architecture or naval machine learning or that sort of area, marine surveys, and they will gather all the information, carry out interviews, prepare a draft report, and the draft report's then considered and maybe then returned to the investigator. And then when the investigation is concluded and there's a report drafted, there is a natural justice phase where persons who may be affected are given a copy of the draft report and they can comment, and that's taken on board then by the board. So that is how it operates. I mean, I have to say I was impressed by the speed and the availability, considering the members of the board, that they were available. It was all done on email, it was all done very efficiently. And as I say, there was an investigator identified and on the job, you know, within a very short space of time. Now, what happens to the reports? The reports are published online when they're concluded. They generally contain recommendations which go to the Minister, and then it's a matter for the department to implement or consider those recommendations, and if they are considered relevant, take that on board in their processes in relation to recommendations and the like, and to feed into other processes, legislation or whatever. In 2017, the department reissued its Code of Safety on recreational vessels. So I would assume previous reports fed into that, and that seems to be a theme also of the Chairman's statement in the report that's just published to date, a particular focus on safety with recreational vessels. I welcome the observation in relation to the Institute of Directors. That's something I'll certainly take back to the board, because one always needs to be reviewed from time to time, and external auditing, and you can always do better. Even if you think you're doing quite well, you can always do better. So certainly that is timely, I think. I can't say whether there has ever been a board review or reassessment, but assuming there has not been one in recent times, I mean, it is a useful thing, and certainly I'm happy to take that on board and go back to the board and discuss that. Air accident and the availability of expertise. There appears to be very good coordination in relation to what is a very specialist area in respect of accidents, and again, this is very preliminary observational, but my understanding is there is very good coordination and sharing between experts in rail accidents, the air aviation and the marine accidents, and one of the members of the board is the chief investigator for the rail accidents. So again, they may be different methods, or, I mean, you know, rail trains, whatever, but I mean, accidents are very similar sort of concepts and methodology and things to critique. So given we're a small country with very small numbers of experts in this area, and happily small numbers of accidents, I appreciate the point that there is merit in sharing of information and expertise, and I think we have that. Fees, Brexit and current position. I think the fees for the chairperson is 8,700 per annum, something like that. The current position on reports are that there are 9 investigations ongoing. That includes one that is led by Antigua and Barbuda, because it's an Antiguan and Barbudan boat, and we are cooperating or contributing to that, but they are, as the flagship country, the lead investigator in relation to that. So the most immediate objective, obviously, is to progress existing investigations and reports. There are, I am told, 3 draft reports that are currently in the natural justice phase, and the responses deadlines are the 5th, 6th and 7th of February. So depending on what comes back from those, there'll be 3 reports then published relatively promptly thereafter. Brexit. I have had a preliminary briefing on this. and if I can respond in a number of ways. In relation to the regulatory regime, apparently this will have little consequence if the UK, when the UK falls outside the EU legal regime, because in large part all of the countries are parties to international marine conventions that have similar safety provisions and regulations. So the EU directives and regulations are closely aligned to the international conventions. So from a standards legal regime, there is a secondary legal regime that can frame continuing operations, if I can put it that way. EMSA, the European Marine Agency, it seems to us the only issue is that that data from the UK will not be uploaded and will not become part of the data platform, and therefore, I suppose the value of the statistics and input from this joint agency is devalued to a certain extent, particularly given it's our nearest neighbour and such a marine entity. It's not something we can do very much about. In relation to marine casualty and response, there is an international safety regime which does operate in different areas to the territorial waters. So I understand emergency response should not be affected. Again, just sort of thinking downstream a little, it may be that the outcome of marine casualty incidences could be prejudiced if delays or difficulties of whatever nature arise in access across the border or access to healthcare facilities, because obviously the norm in relation to EU healthcare regime won't be there. I haven't bottomed it out sufficiently to see what then operates. I think that answers.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or any further? Sorry, yeah.
Just one question. Could I ask, did many other people apply for this position?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know.
I think you're supremely well, you're not challenging at all. I think you're exceptionally well qualified, but I don't know the answer to that. We can ask the Minister because he makes the nomination, but it's certainly to get somebody of your calibre is very welcome indeed that you step forward with that knowledge, and I think we have with every confidence that you will carry out your work with great aplomb and efficiency and effectiveness. I would like to thank you for your comprehensive presentation to the committee this morning. We wish you well with your appointment as chairperson of the Marine Casualty Investigation Board, and we'll now suspend for 5 minutes for our next witnesses, if that's agreed.
Thank you.
Okay then, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll just wait for the old cameras to go on this. We're now in public session. Before we begin, can I remind members and our witnesses turn off their mobile phones completely, as they may interfere with the recording equipment. Are the minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of January, which have been circulated, are they agreed? Agreed. VU scrutiny. Turning to matters VU scrutiny, the Schedule B comments which the committee considered earlier, Com 2018-551, 2018-664, 2018-674, 2018-684, 2018-707, 2018-793. It is proposed that proposals listed in Schedule B warrant no further scrutiny. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence. Correspondence item 2019-394A. A is emailed from Anya Doyle, Research Officer at Fianna Fáil, attaching correspondence from Deputy Robert Troy. B, letter from Deputy Robert Troy, requesting the reps from the National Transport Authority and who will be invited to a committee meeting in order to discuss the possibility of establishing a ride-sharing service to serve rural parts of Ireland. Deputy tried to discuss, or in his absence, Deputy O'Keefe. You moved, right. Therefore, it's proposed that this item be considered in the context of the committee's 2019 work programme. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Correspondence item 2019-395, email from Larry Larkin, correspondence item also forwarded by Deputy Catherine Murphy of the same date, who is writing on behalf of a group of former and present All-Ireland medal winners in athletics and cycling that they would like to make a presentation to our committee about an anomaly regarding representations of Irish athletes competing in international competitions. Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly something we should explore. It came in, so it came into obviously a piece of correspondence to me, and this is the appropriate committee. I really don't know the why that has happened, so I think it would be useful for us to find out. I can't imagine that this is going to be a very extensive item, and it possibly could be tagged to it with another sport item that we'll be dealing with, or might be dealing with.
Makes a lot of sense. So we propose then to consider this item in the context of the committee's work programme in the light of the comments that you've made there, that we put it on as part of the sport commentary meeting that we would have. Is that agreed? Agreed.
Agreed.
Correspondence 2019-396, email from Marie Walsh, Corporate Affairs, FAI, confirming that Chief Executive John Delaney and officials of the FAI have accepted our invitation to appear before us on the 20th of February. It is proposed to note this item as this engagement has been scheduled for the 20th. Is that agreed? Agreed. Sorry. Right, so the second session of today's meeting will consider the role of the Irish Coast Guard. In this regard, I'd like to welcome to our meeting today Mr. Eugene Clonan, Deputy Director, Irish Coast Guard, Mr. Cuivin O'Kierowan, Shinigart, Principal Officer, Maritime Service Division, Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport, Mr. Noel Ferns, Manager of Volunteer Sport and Training, and Ms. Claire O'Connell, Volunteer Sports. You're all very welcome. I just have to read this, just privilege things. We have to read it every meeting. Before we commence, and for the purpose of witness attending, I'm required to say the following. By virtue of Section 17.2.1 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charge against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I now invite Mr. Clonan, Deputy Director, Irish Coast Guard, to make his opening presentation, please.
I thank the Cathaoirleach and members of the committee for the invitation to attend. This is an excellent opportunity to engage with the committee on what we do, our work programme ahead of us, and the challenges we face in search and rescue and pollution prevention service. Just to note that the Coast Guard Director, Chris Reynolds, has taken up an appointment with the EU Capacity Building Mission in Somalia as of last Monday, and is on special leave for a period of approximately 11 months. As Cathaoirleach introduced me, I am Eugene Clonan. I'm the Acting Director and will respond the best way I can to your questions. Just to introduce the people around me. To assist me in dealing with subsequent questions, I'm joined by Noel Ferns, our Volunteer Service and Training Manager, who is responsible for the Volunteer Coast Guard units, Keevina here on my left, and Claire O'Connell from Maritime Services Division of the Department, which provides significant corporate support to the Coast Guard here in Dublin. Before taking questions from members, I would like to take a few minutes, if I may, set out the international context of our work, some history to our development, and an overview of our remit and the challenges we currently face. First of all, the international context in which the Coast Guard operates. What we do is search and rescue and respond to maritime casualties. The maritime and aviation world is regulated by 2 UN bodies, the International Maritime Organisation, which is based in London, and the International Civil Aviation Organisation, which is based in Montreal. This is done through international conventions and agreements between states. So the regulation of maritime and aviation world is through these 2 UN bodies. The International Framework for Marine Search and Rescue is based on the 1979 Search and Rescue Convention. The International Maritime Organisation's Safety Committee divided the world's oceans into 13 search and rescue areas. In each area, the countries concerned have delimited search and rescue regions for which they are responsible. The limits of the Irish Maritime Search and Rescue region correspond with those of the Flight Information region, and this is approximately 200 miles off the west coast, 30 miles off the south coast, and the dividing line between ourselves and the UK up the Irish Sea. The whole process of international search and rescue is based on close cooperation between the ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organisation, and IMO. For maritime SAR, it also requires close cooperation with our neighbours, the UK, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, for which we have a very close working relationship. So that's SAR. For marine casualty response, the international framework for responding to marine casualties is based on the Intervention Convention and the Oil Pollution Preparedness and Response and Cooperation Convention. These provide a legal basis for states to take action for the purpose of preventing, mitigating or eliminating danger from pollution or a threat of pollution following upon a maritime casualty. So if there's a ship breaks down or is damage in our EEZ, we have the powers to intervene if we're not happy what the master is taking. To do that, officers of the Coast Guard are warranted officers under the Sea Pollution Act and the Merchant Shipping Salvage and Wreck Act, and those powers allow us to intervene in maritime casualties to protect the coastline. Just to put the organisation in context and give a very short brief history of the Coast Guard. We were first set up in 1991 as a result of the Doherty report, and we were called the Irish Marine Emergency Service. That was established by government decision in 1990, and it was a division of the Department of Marine at the time. The name was later changed to the Coast Guard in the year 2000, and the division subsequently transferred to the Department of Transport in 2006. Since 1990, the organisation has come a long way from old rocket houses, horse-drawn carts, yellow sou'wester foul weather gear, to the current progressive organisation with state-of-the-art of equipment. I joined the Coast Guard 20 years ago, and in one of the first inspections of the rocket houses around the coast, there were just sheds in dilapidated condition. The guys were wearing, as I said, the yellow sou'wester equipment, but since then we've invested significantly in the coastal volunteer force, and it is the way it is today. Today, as we currently stand, the Irish Coast Guard is a discrete division within the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. As with any other division within the department, we report to the Managing Board and the Minister. Our responsibilities and powers are derived from government decisions, the Search and Rescue Framework, and we're also authorised officers, as I said before, in the Sea Pollution Act and the Merchant Shipping Salvage and Wreck Act. In performing our responsibilities, we provide a variety of services. This is what the Coast Guard does. What we do is we provide a marine radio distress listening service and a broadcasting service for marine safety information. So what really does that mean? We have 3 rescue coordination centres. We have a radio network around the coast, and shipping on marine VHF, HF, call us if they're in distress. We also broadcast on a regular basis marine safety information for weather forecasts, navigation hazards, that type of thing. We also provide a marine assistance service for ship casualties. We monitor marine traffic. We're in our traffic separation schemes off the Fastnet and Tusker. We coordinate search and rescue in the Irish Search and Rescue region along the coasts and cliffs of Ireland, and also in support of Garda Síochána in the major inland lakes and the remote areas. We monitor the EEZ and intervene as necessary for marine casualties to prevent and minimise damage to the marine environment by oil and hazardous and noxious substances, basically the cargoes of the vessels, and also from offshore installations such as the gas rigs and any exploration that's been carried off on the coast. We also provide support and requests to the statutory bodies or agencies, particularly in emergency response. Under the state's major emergency framework, the Coast Guard is nominated as a principal emergency service, Ireland's fourth blue light, along with Garda Síochána, National Ambulance Service and the Fire Service. So that's what we do, but how are we organised? What exactly is this organisation, the Coast Guard, about? To carry out the functions, the Coast Guard organisation is made up of 4 sections. The first one is the Coast Guard operations. Search and rescue ship casualty operations are coordinated through the 3 rescue coordination centres. Marine Rescue Coordination Centre here in Dublin, Marine Rescue Sub-Centre in Valencia, down in Dingle, down on the Iver Peninsula, and Marine Rescue Sub-Centre in Malin Head. These centres are responsible for search and rescue coordination, provision of coastal ready services, ship casualty operations and coordination of all Coast Guard volunteer activities. There is a current staffing complement of 46 staff in these 3 centres, which maintain a 24/7 watch coverage. The other area in Coast Guard operations is maritime casualties. As well as monitoring the distress channels and responding to search and rescue incidents, the RCCs monitor our EEZ and respond to marine casualties which pose a threat of pollution to our coastline. The rescue coordination centres are supported by the Marine Casualty and Counter Pollution section within Coast Guard headquarters. This section is responsible for developing training and maintaining Coast Guard instant response to ship casualty and counter pollution preparedness and response, in line with the Oil Pollution Response and Preparedness Convention. They also maintain the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. They audit local authority plans and harbour plans. These are oil spill contingency plans. They maintain the National Pollution Stockpile in Blanchardstown. They develop training for national response teams, county councils in response to major incident management. There is currently 1 staff member in this area, with 2 more to join shortly. The Coast Guard employs contractors to support operations in this area. So, on receiving calls for distress channels, Marine VHF, EPIRBs, 999 calls, what do we do? To respond to marine incidents on the coast, the RCCs have a number of resources to call upon. Search and rescue helicopters. Coast Guard helicopter services are provided under contract by CHC, operating a fleet of S-92 helicopters out of 4 bases, 1 in Dublin, Shannon, Waterford and Sligo. Helicopter services are on a 15-minute notice by day and 45 minutes by night. In addition to their primary role of provision of maritime search and rescue services, the Coast Guard provides a round-the-clock medical evacuation service, so-called Medivacs, to the offshore islands. In 2018, the Coast Guard flew a total of 102 island Medivacs, an increase on 2017. In addition, Coast Guard helicopters conducted 8 long-range missions, 8 long-range offshore medical evacuations. These are from fishing vessels or merchant vessels off the coast where someone has fallen ill, that type of thing. Coast Guard helicopters have flown in excess of 665 missions in 2018. These missions will also include inland searches for missing persons in support of Garda Síochána and mountain rescue teams. The helicopter service also supplies assistance to the National Ambulance Service. Coast Guard helicopters provides a helicopter emergency medical service to the National Ambulance Service, including inter-hospital transfers. The busiest inter-hospital transfer route is from Letterkenny to University Hospital Galway. So if an ambulance turns up to someone in Donegal or up around that region that have a STEMI or need to get to hospital quickly, the nearest hospital for that type of thing is Galway. We're called in by the National Ambulance Service and we bring the person down to Galway. Another resource that we use very strongly is the RNLI. The RNLI is categorised as the declared resource to which Coast Guard means, the declared resource to Coast Guard, which means that each individual station can be directly requested to respond to individual incidents. The RNLI maintains 38 lifeboats on the island of Ireland manned by volunteers. In 2018, the RNLI were requested to launch on over 836 occasions. The next response element we have, or search and rescue units, we call it the Coast Guard volunteer units, our own units. The nationwide network of volunteer Coast Guard units are an integral part of the National Search and Rescue Framework, with a membership of approximately 1,000 volunteers formed into 44 individual units around the coasts. All units are classed as onshore search units, with 23 of the 44 with an additional function of boat operations and another 17 units with a cliff rescue capability. So they can do onshore search. Some of them have boats and some of them have a cliff rescue responsibility. The Coast Guard units are composed, so if we take the 44 units, the Coast Guard units are composed of 12 three-function units, search, boat and cliff, 16 dual function units and 16 single function units, just doing search only. These units comprise typically of between 15 to 25 volunteers. Each Coast Guard unit is composed of a volunteer OIC, person in charge, a deputy person in charge, a training officer, equipment officer, administration officer and education officer. So that's how they're organised, and each has a particular role, responsibility in the volunteer unit. These Coast Guard units were tasked from the Rescue Coordination Centres on 1,180 missions in 2018. So you can see they provide a significant response for us. All units are coupled with a capacity to support their communities during local emergencies, including inclement weather. These community services were to the forefront during Storm Emma last March, when major challenges were experienced in maintaining essential services. Coast Guard volunteers provided emergency support to healthcare staff and also provided support to isolated homes. Noel here on my right here manages and resources and trains the Coast Guard volunteer units. There are 10 dedicated Coast Guard staff in volunteer service and training, which includes 6 staff on the coast, managing the volunteer units directly. The section's resources are given considerable support by the Maritime Services Division of the Department, including Keevan and Claire here beside me. So the output of all this work, what is it? Lives saved. The Coast Guard attaches particular attention to what is categorised as lives saved. This refers to assistance provided that, if it was not available, would have resulted in the loss of life, or severe risk of loss of life, or protracted hospitalisation. In 2018, the Coast Guard has recorded that in excess of 400 people were categorised as lives saved. And finally, the last bit of the organisation, which we can't do without and we need them absolutely, is the engineering and logistics section. The engineering and logistics section manages the radio communications network in the rescue coordination centres and the radio aerial infrastructure around the coast to maintain the marine VHF and HF coverage in the search and rescue region. VHF channel 16 and HF frequencies for distress listening and calling and working channels. So that's to maintain the communications with the ships at sea. Engineering also managed the Coast Guard stores in Blanchardstown, and there are 7 staff employed in this area with another 3 staff in the pipeline. So, Chairman, I've briefly set out the role and the structure of the Coast Guard within the Department of Transport. The Coast Guard, as we know it, has existed for 19 years under the Department of Transport for 13 years. During that time, it has evolved into the organisation it is today, monitoring the distress channels and responding to incidents, saving lives and responding to the threats of pollution to the coastline. Its success depends largely on the goodwill of the volunteers from the RNLI and its own Coast Guard volunteers to give of their time and become professional responders in maritime life-saving situations. And in return, the Coast Guard provides excellent training and equipment to carry out that task. While the role itself has not changed in those years, the challenges we face have evolved over time and continue to do so. The Coast Guard has always sought to place safety at the heart of all of its activities. What we say is a successful operation is when we get a distress call and we send out a boat, a cliff team or a search team with 5 people, and we get those 5 people back. The bonus is actually carrying out the rescue. So safety is at the heart of our organisation and always has been. However, we are involved in high-risk activities on a daily basis. For that reason, we have invested significantly in training, equipment and systems to ensure that our volunteers and full-time staff are our first concern when we task a search, boat, cliff team or helicopter. Reliable information and awareness of risk is key. Strong communication channels are vital. Learning the lessons from missions that went well, but also that did not, is essential to an organisation that wants to continue to improve what it does. Recent tragic accidents have been difficult for the organisation as a whole. We mourn the loss of close and valued colleagues and friends. We are also compelled to honour their memories by building a stronger, safer, more resilient search and rescue service here for Ireland. Chairman, I hope this provides a quick overview of who we are and what we are about, and I'm more than happy to take any questions from the committee.
Just before I go to the members, as you do in the, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Independence and so on, I just want to obviously we echo what you were saying about the commitment to professionalism of your organisation. The fact that you have identified as lives saved, over 400 lives saved in the last year, is hugely important, and obviously it's a sign of the importance of your work, which can never, you can't overvalue that. It's hugely important, and obviously be professional and voluntary membership as well is hugely, it's all linked up and it's extremely well organised. And to also acknowledge your recent tragic accidents have been very difficult for the organisation and indeed the whole country, mourn the loss of close and valued colleagues that you have as well and friends. So, and I absolutely concur with your commitment to honour their memories by building a stronger, safer, more resilient rescue service for our people. So, Senator O'Mahony is first.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. And thank you for the work you do and the lives you save. I think that it's oftentimes when we meet a Coast Guard vehicle on the road, people aren't fully aware of the details of what you have given here this morning. I know there have been some television programmes in recent times, and I was amazed by the work that you do and carry out in extremely difficult conditions and of high risk to yourself. And as the chairman said, the tragedies that you have suffered from your own colleagues in recent times, our sympathies go to you, because obviously any life lost, but especially, I suppose, in trying to save others is especially tragic. And as well as people employed professionally, the volunteers, I think, above and beyond the call of duty in many respects, deserve great credit for putting their lives on the line and so on. I didn't realise until today, if you like, the extreme network between helicopter rescue and hospital and all of that, all of the work you do in the various areas. And I suppose the first question, or just a couple of quick questions. Your comment on how you're resourced, is that a difficulty by the state? And as well as that, I suppose the follow-up to, following tragedies or investigations or recommendations that are made, have they always been followed up, or is there an issue there as well? And a third thing that I have over the last number of years that I've kind of got asked some questions on, the number of hoax calls that you get for the call out of your services. Is that I was amazed when a few years ago when I got the figures for people making hoax calls, and I suppose the lack of maybe follow-up, or whether it's the inability to follow up on charging people who bring out your services in whatever way. Is that continuing to increase, or has any action been taken on that? Because obviously your services are so needed and need to be for genuine cases. I was astounded by the number of hoax calls and is that still an issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chuck to Kevin O'Keefe.
Chair, I'd like to welcome Mr. Eugene Clune here and his comrades, and wish him good luck in his term as interim director. Chair, I suppose, as previous people said, we are like to be associated of the water simply what happened in the previous couple of years, and hopefully it's good that people can get up the following morning and continue to go to work in circumstances like that. And the Coast Guard, I think, is recognised as maybe the fourth blue light emergency response service in the country. But when you see the work that you do, like, you must be near the top of the plinth. I'll just ask a few questions here. And as you mentioned there, was Clonan, like, you're dependent on the volunteers from the RNLI and from the Coast volunteers who operate under the CUAG, which is the Coastal Unit Advisory Group. I suppose the question I ask, like, have you a good working relationship with the volunteers, like, especially from Cork? Is there issues arising in your office or in your organisation where there's not been addressed? Like, is there concerns that they have raised with you that you're not addressing? Like, maybe, I can't. Don't want to be pointing any specifics, like, given the nature of where we are and that. But of malpractice, like, have they raised issues of malpractice with you, like, and is there outstanding issues there, like, and finding, like, at the moment, you're not recognised as a special operating agency. That's correct. You haven't got special status as a special operating agency. You're not recognised as such. Is that true? As a special operating.
Deputy, we were recognised as the fourth fourth principal emergency service.
Well, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that as a statutory agency, should you not be separate from the department? Like, in your own total independence, would you be better off if you're totally independent of the department? At the moment, you
can answer all the questions because there's no problem. That's a good.
I'll leave that to you at the moment.
No, that's an excellent question. We'll try and take the questions first, and then you may answer. And then, if there's any further issues, if that's okay, I'll take and talk to Captain Murphy.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the work that you do. And from your description, you're doing a lot with very little, given the size of our coastline, which is longer than coastlines of many European countries, and we have a big ratio in terms of land to sea. So there's a lot there to be looked after and policed, and we probably have a greater exposure. So how do we compare now, for example, in terms of the size of the resources and our services to other European countries? Are there typical countries that we should compare ourselves to, or what is the ideal? You might give us some sort of an idea what kind of things you have, like your fleet, cars, boats, trailers, what your needs are that are not being met, and how they're met. I'm sure there's redundancy in some of the fleet that you have as well, and you might tell us what your full operational staff is. I mean, obviously you've described to us that there is a lot of training with volunteers, which is extremely important, and the joint missions outside the jurisdiction, how would the cost be recovered in relation to those? How do you share them out if there is a joint missions? And for example, if for example we have a big rescue and we have to call in, say, in the Irish Sea, for example, our counterparts in the UK. Is there a compensation, or is that something that balances out over time? How is that handled? Will there be any change in the context of Brexit in relation to that? I'm presuming there isn't, but it's just useful just to have an idea. And like in terms of the capital costs, whatever about running costs, I mean, you've obviously updated a lot of very out-of-date facilities since 1990. How is the capital side of that? Like we know what it is in relation to, for example, sports capital grants. Is there a particular fund? Is the point I'm making? I've actually got a good few questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, there's no problem. Yeah.
In relation to the helicopters, we know that is a lease arrangement. Was there? How often is that tendered for, and what does it include, and how robust is that tendering process? Like, would there be interest in it? Has it been, you know, are there different outfits that will tender, and is it like with like? And does that consider, for example, maintenance, and for example, would you hedge, or do you buy the fuel, or they buy the fuel? Is that kind of included in it? Might give us a bit of an outline in relation to that. In relation to air rescue, I mean, obviously, I think it's the responsibility with the Irish Aviation Authority in relation to mapping hazards. What input would you have on that, and how continuous is that process? Is it done? Are there things added to the software all of the time? You might just outline what the learnings have been in recent years on that as well.
In any way, taking for anything you're saying, is that before, and I want to be very clear on this, I gave a commitment that we, and I'm not suggesting you're doing anything.
It's only general.
No, but I just want to be very careful on this one, that I made it clear that anything that might, there are obviously clearly ongoing investigations, and anything that might reflect or might be part of that, I don't wish you to comment on, in fairness to you, but I don't have a problem. You answer any question the way that you want to, but you have that absolute commitment that we're not going to go into any area that hasn't been published or isn't finalised. And I want to assure you, and assure Deputy Murphy that you're not. It's just a line that it's just a line I want to be very clear on. But I appreciate your question, and I'll leave it up to me to answer it if they feel they should. But
it's just useful to know what
input,
how it works. You know, and that's just.
It's an important question.
Very definitely asking that in a very general way. Just in relation to, you mentioned in your opening statement that you include inland inland rescues, because I mean, obviously we're for example. And I did have a situation where somebody contacted me, it's a few years ago now, where they were concerned that the Coast Guard wasn't used in relation to someone that was in distress actually it was in the River Liffey as it happened. It was actually it wasn't in the city centre, it was down a little bit in West Dublin. How is that, you know, how is the Coast Guard called out to that? Is it, you know, is there is it just purely would it be the air rescue services, or would it be just, for example, the you know, boats and the rescues would be done that way? How does that happen? Because I had a lot of queries at the time. You said that there's 7 employed in Blanchardstown with 3 further on the way. Are there other resources, other staff resources coming into any other aspect of it? Have you asked for any that haven't been provided? And if so, would you comment on that? And when you opened your comments, you talked about the Coast Guard director is taking up an appointment, you know, with the building a mission in Somalia, and I can understand there are particular issues there in relation to why that would be a good initiative. Is there what kind of what kind of demands or calls would be made on the Coast Guard for that, the kind of expertise that is available on missions like that? Is that unusual? Would that be something that would be taken up kind of? And I think it's probably a very good one. But you might comment on that if it's something that is out of the ordinary. Thank you.
Thank you. And if needs be afterwards, we can have a separate round of questioning if needs be. On Shandor Podigo KD.
Fear neamsplech agus Shanador. An féidir an na ceisní chuir as gailge. Cuivín. No. Thank you very much for coming in. This refers to all of you and the full team you have and the volunteers something that's important to me is the world with you versus the world without you. And what that means to me, you make a huge difference. There's a big difference with the world, the country with you versus the country without you. And for one, and I know 2 or 3 people who benefited from work, people that you've done, and it's very, very, very significant. And there's nothing more valuable, Chair, than to be involved in work that makes a real difference to people. And as I say in America, we have first responders here. So I want to start off with that. I've huge admiration and respect for what you and your team do. Going on from there, I'm a little bit in the space of some of the questions that Deputy Murphy asked, but it's primarily in relation to an area that I know, for me, I just know a little bit about. That's the search and rescue helicopter. And I'd like to know what, first of all, in relation to that contract, who has got the contract? Who has the contract for the last, or who are the successful tenderers for the contract for the last 20 years? What's the value of that contract overall? And so that's one part of it. The second part of it is it's a Sikorsky helicopter, which is it's a fine helicopter. It's Canadian and I think American manufactured, and it's been used in Ireland. I think it's the only helicopter that's been primarily used in Ireland for the search and rescue situation. But in the majority of situations around Europe, around the world, it's a European helicopter. It's the Augusta 139 that's used. And I'm just wondering how and why that was not considered. Going into details on it, and I don't have all the details on me, but from memory, in relation to one of the tenders at least, the Augusta did not meet one of the pre-qualifying criteria in relation to the Augusta has just over 5 hours endurance, a range of 659, 660 miles. But there was one criteria the Augusta didn't meet, and that shot the Augusta out of the water, as it were. And I believe, if I am right, that that level of competition is really, really important, quite frankly. That's primarily it. I'd also like to have a sense of the annual budget and what percentage the search and rescue helicopter costs of the annual budget. I understand that it's 665 missions in 2018, according to your presentation, so see how much each one of those costs. The other thing, and I'm not promoting Augusta at all, I have no relationship with any of those in any way, but I know the Irish Air Corps, and I would have some engagement peripherally with them. They bought 6 Augustas in 2006, and there might be a way whereby we could be potentially maybe more effective and more cost effective, and maybe continue to do some of the amazing work that you people do in looking at creating some form of a maybe alternative win-win situations. And I'm just thinking and asking questions that to some degree are intended to be outside the box. Gurmagat.
So before I just ask, just to come back in there, that I'm happy if you wish to answer any question that was asked. There's no issue with that. And just on that very point there about the last point on Shandor, I know that some years ago I was interested in that very issue in number 5. I think that take in relation to that contract and issues around it and the cost of it and the expense of it and all of that. So I think just to add to his questions, that contract I think is due for go out again shortly, isn't it?
It's a 10-year contract. We can extend it for a further 3 years. We went into the contract in 2012, so it's due to expire in 2022.
2022.
And at the moment, we're doing a mid-term review of the contract.
Right. So the extension, when was the extension?
Well, we're doing a mid-term review of the contract.
Right.
We're talking to our stakeholders to see is it performing the way we want.
Sure.
Of course, there are KPIs within the contract, and they're being monitored, but we're looking at is it serving over the 5 years and in the next 5 years and beyond, is it serving the needs that we need it to serve?
Right.
So that's ongoing.
And there was a question, I think, about the helicopters themselves, that they're leased, isn't that right, I think?
I'm not quite sure if they're leased.
Yeah,
there may be a mix within Canadian Helicopter Corporation Ireland where there's ownership and leasing.
No, what I mean is that, no, I understand. I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about we lease them.
Oh, yeah, we don't, the state doesn't know.
The state doesn't own them, but it's about 30 million a year, I think is the figure, is it? Or
The value of the contract?
yeah, I think
It's about the overall contract, the current spend on the helicopter of the 5 helicopters, 1 spare, 4 in use, is in about 60 million a year.
60 million.
60 million a year.
Sorry, I thought it was 30,
That's for the overheads, running the bases, paying the staff, maintenance of the helicopters, fuel, all that type of stuff.
Right, right.
So that they're, yeah.
Right, okay, so therefore the original contract then was for, just go over that again, it was for,
So the contract was awarded, I think, in 2011. It's actually, because there was 4 bases, you just can't close.
no, I understand, yeah.
So it was for 4 helicopter bases, Shannon,
Yeah,
Waterford, Shannon and Sligo.
sure.
So
There's no issue with this,
so
I'm just trying to...
Canadian Helicopter Corporation won the contract. There was a process where they took over each base
Yes.
progressively.
Yeah.
The contract award included S-92s. They replaced the old S-61s. Some of those S-61s have been flying since 1960. They're quite old aircraft, however, very capable aircraft. So the S-92s were new aircraft and faster, more sophisticated, could fly in worse weather conditions. So that's why we have those helicopters. Going back to the Augusta, if I may, the S-92, I wasn't involved in the contract process, so I wouldn't have the detail of the bits and pieces, but the requirement was to fly out 200 miles and be able to pick up a crew of a fishing vessel, which consists of about 17 people. So it was to fly out 200 miles, remain on scene, take up 17 people on the winch and fly home again.
Right.
The Augusta is a smaller helicopter.
It is, yeah. It's a lighter
I don't know
helicopter.
how that line went throughout the
The
evaluation process of whether, because I wasn't
The
there.
problem is the only helicopter that can actually do that with 17 passengers in what they call stretcher mode, which I think from memory was the requirement, is the Sikorsky. The Augusta can only do 15.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that was one of the issues. And I've no issue with the winner of the contract.
And having said that, the contract is due to renew. We're doing a mid-term review of the contract. We're talking to our stakeholders. So the whole service is going to be re-provisioned again in 5 to 6 years' time, if you know what I mean, because it'll go to the market again. And the parameters or the specifications may change to suit a changing environment.
I think it'd be worthwhile. I'm just suggesting throwing the net wider if possible in relation to value for money and so on. The other thing is, briefly, on 665 missions or sorties in 2018 at 60 million, that is in the region of 90 grand, 90,000 euros per sortie, if my sums are correct. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's...
What's not there is the training. What you have is the helicopters, 4 bases, different crews, because they're all on rosters. There's about 37 pilots, 40 crew members, engineers. There's a whole support structure behind it. To maintain them, those helicopters, you have to maintain spares, all that type of stuff. When the helicopter's on the ground, it requires maintenance. There's scheduled maintenance periods. There's also, if the issues happen, that they extend it. But with the training, we fly, I think it's about 30 hours per month per base to keep the crews trained. In other words, to keep their competencies up. So the helicopters are flying anyhow to maintain the competencies, and then you have the missions on top of that again.
Yeah, I understand that. It's an area I do understand.
But
to be honest,
which you're quite right. If you get the overall cost divided into the number of missions,
yeah,
that's the figure.
but 60 million for 10 years is 600 million. It's a lot of money.
And the helicopters go back to they stay with the...
They're the owner. They go with the Canadian company, is it? Or
Canadian, it's an Irish company. It's registered in Ireland, but it's part of a Canadian helicopter group.
So it's an Irish subsidiary that Canadian shareholders or Canadian companies set up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it includes the salaries, is that you said, and it includes fuel and maintenance and everything else.
Contractors.
And who are the pilots and the staff employed by? Who's the contract with?
The CHC employ the air crews, the engineers. It's the Coast Guard or the Department of Transport have engaged CHC under contract to provide the search and rescue helicopter service. So from our point of view, we have contract meetings 3 or 4 times a year. We audit them to a certain degree, and they're on 15 minutes notice by day, 45 minutes notice by night. We lift the phone, we call them, and they go. The maintenance, the training, they do all that, and it's all in the terms and conditions of the contract.
That's all, everything is in that contract process?
Yeah.
Okay. So from your perspective then, so you call them, they go out.
Yeah.
So your staff then, your actual staff that you have, when, or are they involved at any stage then?
If there's a large incident where we need to put people out on board a ship or on the coast, we'll use CHC to bring them along. They do search and rescue for us. They do surveillance in the event of pollution incidents.
Sure, right.
They train with the Coast Guard units. They train with the RNLI to keep the competencies up, and also the competencies of the RNLI and our own teams. They're well embedded within the SAR system.
Are there any other questions on the contract now? Are you happy with that? Is everyone right?
And I'm delighted that there's a review, as rightly so, taking place on it. Having said that notwithstanding what I said at the beginning, the absolutely amazing and fantastic work that you and your team are doing, that needs to be at the forefront, and the number of lives you saved, that's very important.
So the 10-year review is to prep for another tender, or for the extension by 3 years that's allowed for within this current tender. Is that right?
Yeah. If I may.
Maybe I can answer that one. I suppose the midterm, what we're doing at the moment, right, is looking at, it's a 10-year contract, so it's the largest component of spend in terms of the Coast Guard. No question, it represents about 85% of the overall amount of money, right? So it's a significant spend, and it's one of the largest contracts in the state. No question that it's a significant amount of money. It was tendered, obviously, internationally at the time against specific requirements. It was given, in terms of the actual development of the tender at the time, it was run through a lot of hoops to get it to the point where it was ready for a tender. We're looking at, in terms of the midterm piece now, it's looking at the contract as it exists. Is it delivering what we want, what we intended at the outset? And it will, part of that is the machines, the helicopters themselves. Part of that is, the built-in resilience that's there. You are paying a premium for a level of contingency and concurrency in the contract in the event that something, God forbid, would happen that requires that amount. So that's in there. So you're paying a significant amount for that. And that's a requirement of the contract. So what we're looking at in terms of the midterm piece is just actually looking at the existing contract. Is it delivering the KPIs that we intended at the outset, and can adjustments be made within the contract for the next, for the remaining element of that contract? The question of extension comes up obviously sooner, and so decisions there will have to be taken. We also have other extraneous issues, obviously, in relation to the contract, in relation to other issues that may impact over the course of the year in terms of other investigations, etc. So that's part of it. We'll also have to consider, and that's part of this process, is actually looking at how we set up a new contract and what kind of parameters might change, might vary. And Senator's correct. In terms of looking at a mix of helicopters, all that kind of, the model will be looked at, and in terms of the value for money that we're getting from the model, the mix of bases, the mix of the type of helicopter, all that kind of thing will be part of that discussion. Not right now, because we're just looking at the contract, but all this information that we're gathering will actually inform the next stage of that, right? So there's a lengthy process. It's a 600 million plus over 10 years contract, so there'll be a lot of interest in it. But there is a small pool internationally, as you probably know, around who's providing, what companies are out there providing the service. We have a specific model that is about a private company. It's not military. A lot of other jurisdictions have military doing it, and Air Corp would have done it in the past. So that decision was taken at that time. That will be reviewed also as part of this process. So all the models for delivery of the service will be looked at in terms of what delivers the best value for money, and that's our primary consideration.
No, thank you. Sorry, Chair. Thank you for that, Caoimhín, and I appreciate that. I know you're 100% on that, and that's going to happen. That's, I think, obviously really important with 600 million, and also the fact that, and I'm not saying it should automatically go to the Air Corps or anything like that, but they've got 6 of these Augusta helicopters, 139s already in operation. And I just think that the choice and the options for you are really, really important in making the best possible decision you can, which I know you will do.
Okay, you wish to answer some of your...
When the senators and the deputies were asking the questions, I wrote them down, and I'm trying to gather them up as we go along. So I think the next thing we'll look at is funding.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'll take that. Just to explain maybe who we are in the thing. I'm the head of Maritime Services Division, right, which is in the department alongside the Coast Guard. We're on the same corridor. We work very closely with Eugene and his colleagues. So Maritime Services Division is essentially, or at least half of it is a kind of support, corporate support to the Coast Guard, and covering a lot of the admin and that kind of function. So and including the financing and budgetary stuff. And more, but and procurement, as we just talked about. So, in terms of funding, there's about 74 million allocated annually to the Coast Guard, and as I say, about 85% of that is the helicopter contract. That's a variable, so that can go up and down. But the other significant expenses or expenditure items around there are volunteer training, exercises, equipment maintenance, renewal, IT is increasingly important, and that there's a lot of investment there, and then volunteer payments, actually paying volunteers for their time, for their doing exercise, etc. So they'd be the essential component parts. The building programme is also, in terms of capital, and Deputy Murphy asked about the capital element to the budget. So a large part of the capital is actually the building programme for Coast Guard units. And that's a bit what they might describe as kind of lumpy, right, from one year to the next, depending on what projects can proceed or not, and what timing. And the Coast Guard works very closely with OPW in relation to the building programme. So most of the units are actually part of an OPW building programme, and it's a partnership. Yes. So it depends on level of funding available, etc. But there's never been a position where a Coast Guard building couldn't proceed for lack of money. If that's, I think you were asking, is there any areas where you're under pressure in terms of funding? My experience, and I worked previously as the finance officer in the department, part of the problem with the Coast Guard building programme has been actually spending the money, being in a position to spend the money. So we've often had to carry over money from one year to the next.
Is it the department or the Coast Guard who decide where the money is spent or agreed?
Coast Guard.
So we've 60 buildings around the coast, 60. Of those buildings, we inspect them, manage them. In the last 20 years, we've built 16. In the last 20 years, we've built 16 new stations, replaced the old stations. 20 years ago, we had just the old rocket houses. Don't know if you know what the rocket houses look like. They're basically a garage that were built in the turn of the last century. In that garage was kept a cart and some equipment. That's what we inherited from when we came in the formation of the state. And 20 years ago, we started to increase and spend more money on these buildings. So of the 60 buildings, we've replaced 16 of them with state-of-the-art buildings. There was a newspaper cutting where there were no toilets, sanitary facilities, that type of thing. This refers to the old rocket houses, of which I think there's about 16 of them around the coast. Now these rocket houses, if I take the 44 units, they're rocket houses which are a sub-unit to the main unit. So they have the main meeting room and the other rocket houses out there on the coast as a storage area. What we're doing is with the OPW do all our maintenance and building projects, first of all. OPW have inspected all these external buildings with the sanitary and the toilet elements. Some of the buildings we can't go near because of the land around them we can't extend. There could be planning issues. It may be just a subsidiary of the main building, so there's no need to put sanitary facilities in it. It's a storage area. So we're looking at those, and where we have identified there needs to be sanitary facilities put in or running water, we've an active programme to do that. Where we can't do that, we'll put on temporary facilities. Where we can't do that, it's that local team in that local area. The best thing to do is use that as a garage, which it is, and meet in the local hotel or local community hall, for which we will fund, so they're out of the weather when they're doing their training. With most of these buildings, remember I mentioned the three function units, the 2 function units, they mostly have good facilities. It's the 1 function units and the 16 of them. That's where they're in other words, we prioritise the busy buildings. What we're looking at now is those 16 units and see where we can improve the conditions for them.
Just the micro detail at the moment, to come down to Cock, the coast of Cock, of Kinsale. There was a very from one report commissioned here, that the Summer Cove should have been closed and that Oyster Haven Jury was properly rebuilt up, and that each could have shared with our in regards purpose buildings, but why was the Summer Cove kept open, when they were supposed to close,
That's fair enough.
That was the expense, yeah. We just started the building.
Yeah. So with Summer Cove, specifically Summer Cove, I have the capital programme, the refurbishment programme, and the renewal. So with the building projects for Summer Cove, I have 2018. There's an amount of money allotted to that, which is a 6-figure sum to refurbish that station, and
that's commenced the first week of January.
And that's commenced in the first week of January this year. So we have a programme of refurbishment.
But what I'm saying is there was a recommendation of amalgamations around this area, and along this coastline. Was it mentioned, that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Can I pass over to Noel Fergus? He'd be closer to that than I am.
It's on, my apologies, Deputy. Yeah, so there was a programme of amalgamations there over several years, like Greystones and Wicklow were amalgamated, Courtown and Arklow were amalgamated, but in a lot of cases we were in a position we were able to hold on to the second building. So in a lot of cases that might not be the main building. Take for instance Carnsore and Rosslare. The 2 of them were amalgamated, Oyster Haven, Summer Cove, Towhead, Glandore. So we had a significant amount of amalgamations. But rather than a lot of cases shutting down the small station because the geographical area or the border, if you like, for that particular unit spread out, we still have to cover the same coastline, but you would amalgamate teams, and for operational efficiency it made a lot more sense. But we still have a situation where there will be buildings within the amalgamated units that we still want to invest in some money in. There's no new build going in down there, but that's under our maintenance programme. So that was one that we got across the line in 2018. So we're spending an amount of money on that to bring that up to the standard that we wanted to have. But in a lot of cases, they are amalgamated, but they still hold on to, if you like, the smaller building, the smaller outstation. And that's how the amalgamation worked in that situation.
Alexa Transer.
Just by way of history, that relation, my father's first cousin of his was the Rocket Man in West Kerry in Ballinall, Ballydavid, where the Coast Guard station was burnt actually during the Troubles. But for many years he used to have the only telephone in the village, and he used to be the guy that go up to see if there was a ship in distress, and he used to climb the sort of pole to fire the rocket and all of that. So there's a great bit of history attached to people who gave that service over the years, and I just acknowledge it now, just by way of
when we came into the service, Noel was in Greystones unit as one of the volunteers down there. We had the telephone bills for the number 1 men, as they call them, around the country.
Right. They've
now been replaced by mobile Android phones now, so we're getting there. Yeah, but some of the stuff when we went around the coast, the old rocket carts, we were able to preserve and pass on to the communities and that type of stuff.
Excellent, yeah.
Sorry.
That one of the problems is actually being in a position to spend the money. Is it the OPW that actually carry out carries out the work. So is it the OPW that hasn't got the capacity to spend, or is it volunteers, or who is it?
If I might take that along with some of the other questions and bunch it together, generally the funding for the coast has increased over the last number of years from 66 million to 77 million in 2019. During just going back to the recent history, if I may, 2008 and the fiscal crisis, we were one of the only divisions within the department that maintained our expenditure and our budgets throughout that period. They weren't cut at all. The staffing has also increased. During that period, we were formed in 1991. In that period, during the fiscal crisis, our staff were coming up. There was quite a lot of turnover within our rescue coordinate centres because the staff were coming up to retirement. We were recruiting throughout that period. So we've always been supported very positively from the department in terms of funding and replacement of staff. With the building programme, it's, as you can imagine, with planning, getting all that stuff through the planning authorities, and we normally have 2 to 3 building projects, one slightly ahead of another step to try and get it going. We've built 16 station houses over the last number of years.
Can I just address the issue? Is it the OPW?
Yes.
So
They
make the application to the local authority.
Yeah.
They have a great deal of experience with property and building projects. And one of the things that drives us nuts is that there's money allocated and it's not spent. Because, I mean, it's a big deal to get a commitment. So what's the impediment? Or is there something that could be streamlined in terms of when money is allocated that it is actually spent? If that is the issue, being in a position to spend money, as you just said, has that been analysed?
Yeah, I mean, I can come in on that. I suppose this is across the board, as you know, in terms of there are certain bottlenecks in the system around the capacity to actually put in place the design of these buildings and making sure that they are fit for purpose. And I suppose there's probably even a greater consideration around that maybe than in the past. And the design level of these new buildings particularly is state of the art. So that's an issue, right? So we're not going to invest in something that we're not completely happy meets all the requirements. So you do, I suppose, maybe to put it one way, that the level of ambition around the building programme is high, but the actual delivery level behind that then requires certain things to be met, and that does mean you move money from one year to the next.
Could I just ask, Chair, that we get a note on the strategic investment? What wasn't spent, and we might have a better idea then, and we can talk about it maybe, or consider it, so as that we can get on with the meeting. But I think it's useful to have a look at the profile of that.
You mentioned about Greystones. Did Greystones entail having to obtain more land again, new property, because was there other assets down the coastline, which could have been just as attractive as Greystones,
Yeah, I can
Why
take that.
Greystones,
Just in relation to Greystones, Deputy, Greystones was a sort of a unique situation, and as you know, the harbour development went in down there, and I was very involved myself in trying to get the Coast Guard station across the line for many years. But as you know, down there is a whole community section has been built, where there's about 6 particular organisations were put within a section of the harbour, and we have a state-of-the-art facility to go in there. We got it across the line this year, so it's well underway, but it's on a dedicated site which actually sits on the old pier in Greystone. So technically that caused a lot of additional work, if you like, in preparing that one to go in, but we're delighted that Greystones is across the line and will be state-of-the-art location within the harbour in Greystones.
Where possible, we try to have these station houses in the centre of the community where the people live and where the activity takes place. So in the event of a search and rescue, it's close by, not back out the road.
That's like urban rural divide talk, okay.
Well, village centres. It's where the community lives.
Okay.
So that was, did I go through all the funding issues and resourcing. So Deputy Murphy was talking about in search and rescue incidents about costs, and particularly costs with ourselves and the UK and transfer, For search and rescue, we don't charge. That's the ethos, and that's the ethos throughout the world.
Yeah.
So if in years gone by, when we had no helicopter service, the UK Maritime Safety Agency, the UK Coast Guard used to provide that service, and they did not have helicopters. It was the RAF and Royal Navy bases on the west coast of the UK used to provide that service. Today we have the service we have here, and we do our search and rescue with our helicopters, the Arna Life. They don't charge us for providing that service. The Coast Guard units are funded by the state, so that's how the system works. If we send a helicopter into Northern Ireland up the hills, which we're often requested by the Marine Rescue Coordination Centre in Belfast, we don't charge for it. Okay. If there's a pollution incident, it's the principle there is the polluter pays. So if there's a pollution incident, a ship casualty, we need to hire tugs or hire salvage firms. That all goes back to the ship owner. So that's where we collect costs and cost recovery.
And would you have had?
Yes, we've had that in the past.
Okay.
If I take going back a couple of years to print, when we had the Prestige sank down off Spain, we had the Princess Aoife, which was an 80,000 ton tanker, had cracks in its deck it was heading across from Murmansk, across the Atlantic to Houston, Texas, to offload a cargo of crude oil. That had cracks in its deck. They also had an accident off the coast where 3 crew members were killed. It was heavy weather. The life raft up forward broke loose. The captain sent 3 guys forward to secure the life raft. A wave came over and 3 people lost their lives. That tanker came into Donegal Bay, anchored, and when they anchored to sort out the problem with the crew and repatriate the bodies and get other crew members aboard, they found cracks in the deck. Based on that incident, the Marine Survey Office came on board. The ship is not capable of going to sea, it'll break up. So we had to take all the cargo off that vessel onto another ship and make temporary repairs, and that took 40 days. All the expenses the state incurred in that were cost recovered from the owner.
Okay, right. Okay.
So if I deal, Deputy Keith, with the CUIG and Coastal Unit Advisory Group and grievances and that type of thing. So the Coastal Unit Advisory Group, if I just may, I'll just get my note here. Sorry. We value our volunteers very much. We work very, very closely with them. They're our colleagues, and there's no difference between the full-time staff and the volunteers in how we operate together. That's the main point. Realising that there's 1,000 volunteers out there, how do we manage and operate with them? What we have here is the Coast Guard Code, which basically sets out our agreement of how we act and how they act for us, how they provide their free time. Like every organisation, these guys are all guys and girls are all volunteers, but we have to have some procedures in place in which how we negotiate, how we operate together. And this code of practice is based on best practice. I've spoken to Concern, Trócaire, volunteer organisations, look at their HR procedures and processes, and these are best in class. We gotta, I'll go on before then. So how we work with our volunteers, we need we pull together a Coastal Unit Advisory Group, and that's been in existence for a good number of years. It consists of 6 members of the 6 OICs from around the coast who are elected by the volunteers around the coast. And their job is to present the views of all the units. The 6 members are selected on a geographical basis and serve for a period of 3 years. The group is a representative of coastal search teams, boat teams and cliff units. It meets regularly with the National Volunteer Services Manager and annually with the Director. But in actual fact, I attend all the meetings as well. The additional meetings can be called by the CUIG or management as necessary. To date, the structure has proven to be an effective forum for advocating volunteer issues. So what do we do when we sit down? If we want to introduce new equipment, we talk to the CUIG to see is it acceptable. If they come up with ideas that they've seen around the coast, this would be a better way of doing it. It's presented at that form and we work through it. In other words, we're not implementing stuff onto the volunteers which they haven't heard of or seen before. We negotiate to make sure that it's palatable and it'll work. As well as the CUIG, what we have is sector meetings. So we have 3 sector meetings a year in each sector where we go down, and that's where all the volunteers who are in that sector attend. It's a round table forum and any issues are presented and talked through and problems, and it's like a community hall, parish type forum where everybody gets it off their chest and we see what we can do or where we've fallen down, what we're doing well, what's working, what's not working. As well as that, we have the coastal unit sector managers. There's 6 of those on the coast, and they have about how many units per each?
Between 6 and 7.
6 and 7 units, and they're the face management dealing with the groups as they are. Last year, every year we have a annual conference, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, where we get all the area officers together and go through particular issues. It also allows a chance for the volunteer area officers to meet the CUIGs. There are 6 elected representatives, so that goes on. What we've done is we now have 3 of those meetings per year to increase the communications, because communications with the volunteers and how they're getting on, we see is extremely important.
I suppose.
Yeah.
No, sorry, it's over.
So we have 1,000 volunteers. You have grievances. You have disciplinary procedures, like with any other organisation. Of 1,000 volunteers, we have, of the number of grievance procedures or grievances underway, we have only about 1% of the 1,000 volunteers. So as a benchmark to other organisations, it's quite low. And the reason it's low is because we engage. Now, with grievances, it's normally 2 parties or maybe 3 or 4. It's in a local parish, local community. It can get very raw and troublesome. In the past, we've only had 3 managers on the coast, and the time has gone on and it has festered. Some of those issues you might have heard about, what we've done is, one, we've got additional staff, but to solve those particular issues, we've taken on the assistance of a particular HR company, one, to review our manual, and it stands up to good best practice, but also to carry out mediation with these particular grievances to try and work them through the process. If the mediation doesn't work, there's still the process to go through, and there's warnings and there's appeals and all that type of stuff. But the whole thing is, the process is the process, and we work through it.
Very good.
On the hoax calls that I asked.
Oh, the hoax calls. Compared to the other emergency services, we don't get many. The hoax calls normally come through the 999 system. When we get a call, we have 3 guys on watch. One is called the SAR Mission Coordinator. He takes the call. He asks, "Where are you?" the usual questions, and he'll very quickly find out if it's a hoax call or not. We don't get many. Where we do get persistent hoax calls, if it's a mobile number or a house number, we have that on the screen in front of us. If it's persistent, we can get onto the provider of the GSM service or the landline and ask them to block it, and there's a process to go through to do that. If a person is found to be doing it over a good period of time, the response is to go to the guards in Harcourt Street in their communication centre.
So has there been any prosecution?
No, not from the Coast Guard point of view. There may be with the other emergency services, with the National Ambulance Service, the Fire Service or Garda Síochána, but I don't attend those meetings. I'm not aware of them. If I had my operations manager here, he'd be able to tell me that.
You know, it's just the difficulty with some of the other emergency services. If they get a call and there's life, you know, if they were genuine, how do the balance? How do they know it's a hoax call?
With a call where we have to respond, there's obviously life in danger. When our teams go out, they carry out a risk assessment based on what they see in front of them, and then they carry out their job in a safe manner to effect the rescue.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's a hoax call, they could have been needed somewhere else. I mean, it's using.
If that happens,
Respond in
if
good
that
faith,
happens,
if you can.
we have to respond because we don't know.
Well, that's the point I'm making. So in other words, do you respond to many of those calls that turn out when you make it?
Normally, the SAR mission coordinator is able to weed that out, but there have been times where we've responded, and I'll give you a particular incident up in the North County Dublin, where aircraft and ships carry EPIRBs, electronic position response beacons. And one of these beacons went off. It's satellite. It's received by satellite, goes down to an MCC, and we get a call. It gives a position, the name of the vessel, the name of the vessel. We rang the owner. I sold that boat years ago, but there's still a distress call. So we sent the helicopter out, and it was in a garden shed, the EPIRB. So we were able to pick it up. But that was an accidental activation. If it's malicious,
No, it's just the malicious ones.
if it's malicious and something happened over here, and these people were endangered because our team were over here, well then we have to take a case against them. We haven't had to do that, but that's the step we would take.
And when a call is made, does names have to be given, or can people make calls to say that there's...
If it's a real incident, the people will give the details. That's where the SMC
give the
comes in.
details of who's calling?
Yeah, if they can.
Yeah.
There's some calls we get where it's just, I'm in distress, and my position is, and the line could go dead. You know, it's...
Yeah.
If it's a genuine caller, the caller will give as much information as they can, if they can. If it's a hoax, the guys on the desk will know this is not. I'm not getting the right response here.
But they still must err on the side. You must err on the side of responding.
Course, yeah.
So
We
that's the. I mean, it's concern for the great service that you give that I'm.
That you're coming. Yeah. If we get calls, we call them incidents. It's logged in a system. If the SMC, the SAR mission coordinator, has any issue about it, there's a comment section that's taken up by his manager, and we would close out and chase out on those.
Yeah, okay.
The point is that in good faith you go.
Yeah.
Basically, you know, obviously you have to be assured of facts as you can get them, but the balance is you go. If in doubt, you go out. Isn't that it, really?
Yes, that's it. Now, every go or call out is based on a risk assessment, and when the team goes out, they risk it, and if they can't go, they can't, due to safety, they can't go.
Of course, and I understand that. I mean, it's obviously a rescue service. I think you've any more questions there? Sorry.
No, Chair, I asked one question also. Do the Coast Guard not feel that they should be given a separate statutory agency, like, from what I'm hearing, Chair, like, good idea, yes, Chair, yes. Give them more autonomy. Would they comment on that, like, like, I don't think the NTA are above
a political decision, I'd say.
So I can answer that about the statute. There's a bill, I think, on the books by Deputy Troy, and the Minister on a number of occasions over the last number of years has expressed views on the case of a standalone statutory authority, and certainly at that time was not convinced the net value added. Once the bill has progressed further, he would certainly be happy to provide his considered views on the merits and demerits of the proposal to the Minister. Where I stand at this as the Director of the Coast Guard, that's a policy decision. I get on with my job. We have the legislation, the SAR framework, and with the Air Accident Investigation Unit report, we have an interim report. A final report is due soon. We have the MCIB report. There are issues in that which need to be reviewed, and they are under review. That may highlight certain issues that we need to deal with.
Back to us as a committee, I presume, in that context. Just
if we'll be here.
Pardon?
If we'll be here.
Of course we'll be here. I hope we'll all be here. So I think, is there any other issues?
There was an issue about the Director going to Somalia.
Oh, yes.
Remember that from Deputy Murphy?
Sure.
The Coast Guard is an international organisation. We do search and rescue. We attend the International Civil Aviation Authority and the International Maritime Organisation Joint Working Group on Search and Rescue. Because aviation has SAR, maritime has SAR. That group writes the guidelines and the booklets on how to do it for the worldwide audience. Within that group, there's opportunities for more developed nations to go and assist third world countries, particularly in Africa and places like that. So there are opportunities for search and rescue people to go and assist other countries in how to progress. Chris has gone over to Somalia as part of a EU mission to help the capacity building in the search and rescue and security Coast Guard type business.
I think that's very welcome, and it's usually advantageous that we have somebody of his calibre to provide that skill.
Absolutely, yeah, and we should be
knowledge.
proud of that.
And it adds to, obviously, the credibility of your organisation, that capacity at that level is needed.
And it shows that
And
we're
it's
well
very
regarded within the KO IMO community,
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
we attend the IMO in London for making conventions, rules, regulations, and all that
course,
type of
yeah.
thing, and improving search and rescue and ship casualty and pollution response.
Well, then I'd like to thank you for your comprehensive presentation and the answer to the questions today. I again would like to pay tribute to you and your staff for your work, your professionalism, your bravery in keeping us all safe and for saving lives. Particularly like to pay tribute to the over 1,000 volunteers that you work with for their commitment and their professionalism again in keeping us safe and for saving lives. And we look forward to engaging with you again in the near future. And just one final point, that I presume when the review is complete or at the appropriate stage, you refer back to the committee, the helicopter issue, that contract. Please, I think that's an important point as well. Yeah. So I'll adjourn then until...
So thank you for me before you go, Kayla.
Sorry.
I welcome the opportunity, delighted the opportunity to give here to give the background of what's happening at the Coast Guard. And if the committee wishes or would like, they're more than welcome to come over to our Marine Rescue Coordination Centre in Leeson Street to see how we do what we do.
Yeah, we'll be delighted to take up that opportunity. And I'll adjourn the meeting now until until 13:30 on the 6th of February 2019. Thank you very much.